Okay, everybody, so it looks like it is right at noon. We have quite a bit of stuff to get through today, so we will get started. We'll just start out with some introduction stuff and talking about who I am and who CDT is quickly. We'll cover all that upfront stuff. It also gives a chance for some of our attendees who haven't necessarily got on just yet to hop in. If you're not familiar with the webinar interface, when you have your interface, it usually pops up on the top right side. If you'd like to maximize your viewing screen, you will see this little minimize UI button, and it collapses. And once it collapses, it also can expand. Also, if you notice in the slide before, we won't take live questions just because of the time frame that we have. So if you do have a question that you'd like to ask, I try to leave a little bit enough time at the end to answer anyone's questions. So if you wouldn't mind, type that question down in your questions portion of your interface. Go ahead and enter and put that in there. And then once we get to the end, I'll go through those and answer as many as I possibly can. So, all right. So myself, my name is Ben Givhan. I am an applications manager and the training manager for customer-driven technology. For those of you that have been on our webcast before, I've done a number of them in the past. A little bit about CDT as a whole. CDT is a value-added reseller of PTC products. For some of you that are not familiar with the VAR channel of what PTC's VAR channel is, you think of it as PTC being Ford, and we're the Ford dealership. So we sell all PTC products, including all of the wind chill solutions and all of the Creo solutions, but everything else that they also have. We are now also a part of a larger company called Barry-Wehmiller. Barry-Wehmiller purchased us, it has to be a year ago now, something about like that. And we now have the backing of a fairly large engineering services company, and so we now have pretty much a one-stop shop when it comes to all of your essentially engineering, production, migration for wind chill, all of the services type stuff that you could find. So with that as a backing, we're now one of the if not the largest value-added reseller in North America. We have a big, bright future in front of us, and we're growing fast. We're growing so fast that we actually just purchased a company called Enzer. If any of you are familiar with the Enzer VAR out of the East Coast, we acquired them maybe a week and a half ago was when the final everything went final. So for those of you, again, that have been on with us and have seen where we have had training centers at now, we also, if you notice at the bottom, also have training centers now in New Jersey, which this facility is actually right outside of Philadelphia. We now have one in Charlotte, and then we also have now one in Orlando. So we're expanding not only our footprint as far as the VAR and sales capabilities, but also our training capabilities. We do take a lot of pride in our training capabilities. We hold classes for not only very large student bases, but also for onesies and twosies. So there are very few times that if you find the class through us or on the PTC site in one of our facilities that pretty much they're always guaranteed to run. So for any of your training needs, you can see our training schedule down here at the bottom, but you also will be able to find it in these facilities on the PTC website. And if you have any more questions about some of the training that we do, please feel free to give us a shout either by phone or by contact email that I'll give you at the end of the webcast. Okay. We have been doing a number of different webinars for quite a while. We took a break maybe about 6 months ago or something like that. We were with all of our acquisitions and our move-overs. We had to kind of take a break to give everybody a deep breath. We had so much going on, and we're going to start doing these again like we were every week. So hopefully, if you find some good information today, that you'll participate in the next ones that are coming up. All right, so everybody, obviously, today is on here to see Creo Parametric, what's new, and the Creo Parametric 2, and that should be a .0. Forgot to type the 0. We'll cover some fairly specific stuff. A lot of this kind of blends together between one of the, me showing this in part of the demo compared to showing it in another part of the demo. So we'll cover a number of different things here. Some of the things that I find to be important, and this is the Wildfire 5 to Creo 2.0. So for those of you that are actually using Creo 1 and now are looking at what Creo 2 has to offer, there are some things that there are some differences between Creo 1 to 2. There are a few specific tools like the new sectioning tool. There's a few different things. It's not obviously as different of a jump from Wildfire 5 to Creo 1 or Creo 2, so that's why we kind of wanted to focus on the 5.0 to the 2.0 jump. So we'll cover obviously all the interface stuff. I'll go through some of the where you find options and some of the differences, configuration enhancements that they have. We'll concentrate on some Sketcher and some tool functions, and obviously you see up there the editing enhancements, and then I'll go through some assembly and some sheet metal stuff, and then again towards the end of the webcast we'll go through the question and answer part of it. Now, one other slide that I wanted to show you quickly, this is a sales slide that one of my sales guys used, and it's kind of an interesting slide. For those of you who don't know, that PTC essentially has their own internal auditing software where they essentially rate what the releases of software are on some scale, and don't ask me exactly what that scale is, but essentially it's their own quality system. You can see here over the years where they have rated some of the releases, but one thing that's interesting about this is that obviously you see a gap here, and the gap, the software that you're missing is the Creo 1.0. So PTC, in my opinion, is pushing a lot of their customers, a lot of their larger customers, specifically to the 2.0 release. I believe that they feel that it's a little bit more of a stable release of software, and so just want to make sure everybody can see that, and if you are considering a switch to one of the versions of Creo, you will see that in Creo 2. And while I'm at it here, and hopefully this won't take just a second.
And we do have some poll questions as well.
Yeah, and I'll get to that here in just a second. Yeah, so I did want to show you this here real quick before we got going. For those of you that were wondering, let's get back up here. Sorry, guys. When Creo 3.0 was coming out, Creo 3.0 is coming out. Where's that at? Parametric. Here we go. So Creo 3.0 is scheduled for release in Q4 of this year, so towards the end of this year. Obviously, these schedules are subject to change. One of the things that I heard that PTC is working hurriedly on, and actually push this back a little bit, is that they're making a very large effort to be able to open SolidWorks, CATIA, and some of the other CAD packages natively. So you don't have to have some of that third-party stuff. You don't have to have those things. So supposedly, and again, we know these things change, that that will be within the 3.0 release. So it's kind of interesting to hear some of that, and hopefully they were able to accomplish that for their first releases of the 3.0 version. And just like Rosalinda said, we do have, take a few seconds here, we do have a few poll questions to go through. It kind of helps us gauge what type of audience we have and where everybody's at. So Rosalinda, if you wouldn't mind, would you please put up those poll questions for us?
Yes, I will. Just a moment. And we have just 2 more. Okay, we've got one more, and then Ben will start with his presentation. Okay, Ben, it's all yours.
Okay, can you do me a favor? And because again, I can't see the the results. What was the major results for the version of software that they're using right now for Creo Pro?
It looks like, let's see here.
You still there, Rosalina?
I'm here. It looks like a majority of everyone that answered, there were 36% using 2.0.
Okay.
And the lowest percentage, it looks like, oh, there's 24% using 5.0.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
So pretty current users.
Okay, good. So it looks like we have a good mix. And again, for those of you guys that are still using 5, this will be kind of a good introduction to what you will be moving to in the future. So we'll go ahead and start up here. And again, all I did really, guys, was just click on my icon and we just fired in. So most of us at this point in time has actually seen or have had some type of conversation about what the new interface is going to look like. Right away, you see major changes in the Creo releases of software. So what PTC did essentially, in a quick explanation, is they have taken all, and when I say all, I mean all of their modules, modes, or whatever else you'd like to call it, Sketcher, Assembly, Mechanica, piping and caping package, whatever it may be, the milling package, and they have now turned it into what is considered to be a ribbon interface. So if I just fire up a new part here, let's do this first. If I just fire up a regular part here, you will see essentially the style of interface that you will be using at any given time throughout all of the software. So the idea was to logically group commands, and for those of you that were in Wildfire 5, were introduced to this in the drawing package. One of the major, though, drawbacks of it in Wildfire 5 was essentially the isolation of tools only if you were in a specific tab. So whether it was through right-click options or whether it was through the tools themselves, for instance, if you were in the Layout tab, you couldn't put on a dimension in any form. And so PTC got a lot of fight with that, and if anybody's a part of the PTC user forums, a while ago you saw some of those conversations that went back and forth. And so what happened in Creo 2 is they tried to make that a little bit easier to deal with. And one of the ways they did that was, with the ability to customize your interface on a fairly global level. There's one thing that you can't do, and I'll show you that. And then the other thing they did was is that they introduced also this little in-graphics toolbar. Now, for a lot of you, this will sit up top, but I just kind of moved it over to the right-hand side. And so specifically what this does over here is that if you notice is that because of the logical idea of grouping up commands is that as you drag through commands, you see commands that are specific to the tabs. So you see a lot of your view stuff where you'll see, the application of your appearances and zoom in and zoom out and turning off datums and that stuff. Well, the problem is that if I'm in the modeling tab, obviously you don't have those functions. And so if you want to, if this over here did not exist, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, you would essentially have to go into your view tab just to do a zoom in or zoom out or go to your name to view list. And so essentially we'll talk about customizing this, but let's start out with this guy over here, is that, again, this is one of how they battled this a little bit, is that this is called the in-graphics toolbar. And what you will see in here are the most common viewing type commands. And when I say viewing, I mean zoom in, zoom out, turning off your datums, any 3D annotation stuff you have, shading, named view list. And if you haven't done this, for those of you in Creo 2, what you can do is right-click on this and essentially customize this by adding or taking away. So for instance, if I don't want the spin center, I can take that away. Now, one of the first questions that I always get is, hey, can I add other stuff to this? And the answer is no. So you are limited to what the tools or what the commands are in this list, but if you only use 4 or 5 of them, you can limit it to 4 or 5 of them. If you use all of them, you can put them all back in. And then also you can see that I can change size. So if I want them to be a little bit bigger, or if I want to change location, again, mine's on the right, you can change it to the top. So again, it makes it a little bit easier to deal with the transition, the interface, when you're not jumping from one tab to the next, that you have this quick access toolbar. Now, also what was added into the, and this is in Creo 1, not necessarily Creo 2, this was from the Creo release, is that you will also find something called a command search. So for those of you that are familiar with the old menu mapper, when the 2001 to the Wildfire, it was very useful and helped you find things. First of all, there are only 2 commands that have actually changed names in the software. Now they have condensed like variable section sweep and sweep into sweep, but into a command called sweep, which you see right here, but none of the other commands have actually changed names in any form except for 2 of them that are in Sketcher, and I'll show them to you and they're pretty obvious. So what happens is, let's say that I'm in the View tab and I don't know where Extrude is. So if I go into the View tab and I don't know where Extrude is, what you will have is this little thing called the command search. And if I expand the command search and start to type in a command, okay, you will see that as I start to type in that command, that it will show me the results of my typing. And if I want the Extrude tool, notice how if I hover over it, not only does it highlight the tab that it's in, the model tab, but it also will highlight the command itself. And if I want to, it will also fire off the Extrude command. So for those of you that are wary about the switch, again, the 2001 to Wildfire, this is, first of all, it's not nearly as difficult to find the things, I promise you. And also, and if you are having problems finding some of your other commands that you're used to in specific spots, you always can use the command search to hunt them down. And again, whether you're in Assembly or Sketcher or whatever you may be using, you can use that also. Okay. Also, you'll notice that in some cases, they have taken some commands out of the interface altogether, and I promise you, unless I'm missing it from somewhere, and maybe it's buried somewhere, but notice how I shouldn't even tell you, you won't notice map keys through any of these tabs, but again, that doesn't mean we can't find it and it's not taken away. You'll notice that if I go in and start to type map, you'll see map keys, and again, you see the old interface. So there is nothing in any form been taken away from you out of the interface or made it overly confusing, right? They've just kind of logically grouped commands, given you a way to search for the things that you want, and also what you can do here, and this is one of the best parts about this, is that if you right-click up in your ribbon, you can do a customize the ribbon. And what customizing the ribbon allows you to do is modify not only order of your groupings, but you also, let's say that you never ever use the render tab. You can go in and here's my render button, I can pick it and my render goes away. For whatever reason, I never ever use the annotate tab. I go in and take it away. So not only can you take away objects out of or essentially tabs out of the interface, you also have the ability to create new tabs. So I'll say, here's a new tab, and I'm going to rename that tab to the Ben tab. And in the Ben tab, I'm going to throw commands into it. So what I'm doing here is essentially creating my own tab, 100% my own tab. And so let's say that your job function is you only use 30 commands, or not, let's say 20 commands. You literally, if you wanted to, could eliminate all of the PTC tabs, create your own tab, whatever you'd like to call it, and only put in the commands that you want. You couldn't do this in Wildfire 5 with the drawing package. And so if you find yourself wanting to customize the interface, you got it. For those of you that are using Office, 2010 products, essentially it's the exact same rules that go along with the Office 2010 products as far as interface and ribbon interface that go along with now with Creo 2.0. Okay? Now, while we are here, for those of you that are familiar with the config.win file, which obviously was your interface file, now when you save your interface, essentially what it does, there is no more config.win. It is now this file right here. Okay, so it is the Creo Parametric Customization.ui. You can save these off, you can share these, but the config.win file altogether has gone away in Creo 2.0. And again, it is now a .ui file. It behaves exactly the same way that it did in the older version of the software. It still loads from the exact same points, but it now is a .ui file and is no longer a config.win. So just a little bit of a tidbit as we go through that. Okay. All right. So a little bit about structure here and going through that. Last thing I'll talk about here as far as interface. If you notice under File and if you go to Options, essentially now PTC has condensed all of your parametric configuration, all of the software configurations in any form, whether it's colors or whether it's your config.pros or any of that stuff, is all now found out of the File and out of the Options button right here. So you'll see all of your system colors. Notice how here are all of your colors. Colors still work the same way. They still need that .scl file, right? But anything that you change and anything that you want to configure about the software now can be controlled out of one spot. And for those of you that have done a lot of configuration of the software, a lot of this stuff was all over the place, and so it was a little bit different, or I shouldn't say different, but a little bit hard to kind of find everything unless you knew where everything was at. Now everything's in one spot as far as changing behavior and colors and all that other good stuff with it. Okay, so for the most part, that covers our interface and essentially structure as far as configuration goes and where to find some of those things. So now what we'll do is we'll just kind of dive into some of the things that we talked about showing. So the first one we talked about is Sketcher. Essentially, PTC has they haven't changed, but they've given you another way to get into Sketcher, and honestly, I like it quite a bit. So in previous versions of the software, if you wanted to sketch on a datum plane or create an extrude on a datum plane, in most cases you would start your sketch tool or start your extrude tool depending on how you were creating your sketches and your extrudes, and then once you got in, you do this, and then once you got in, you pick it and you see this and you hit the sketch button. Now, and same way if you're in your extrude, you start your extrude and you right-click and say Define Internal Sketch, and then you pick this guy. And again, obviously I'm doing that, so you can still do that. But now, when you want to create an extrude, the easiest way to do this is all you have to do is pick the datum plane you want, start your extrude tool, and I am immediately into Sketcher. So it bypasses at the start, only at the start, the functions of configuring the orientation of your sketching plane. Now, for those of you that are interested in still orienting your sketching plane, you'll still be able to do that under Sketch Setup. But what PTC found out is that 90% of the time, most users want to pick a datum plane or pick a surface and start sketching on it. And yes, they're concerned about orientation, but a majority of the time, you just usually hit the sketch button anyway. So why force you to hit the sketch button? Only force users to hit the sketch button if they, or go back up and change it if they want to. So you will find that here under the Sketch Setup, all of the old functions. But now, again, when I want to hop into creating an extrude, I pick a datum plane, start the extrude button, and I'm directly in the Sketcher. Also notice by default now, that Sketcher starts out in 3D. Some users love this, some users hate it, some users have to get accustomed to loving it. You can create config.pros, or there is a config.pro that will take this, that will make it so it starts in 2D. But again, if you are in 3D, so let's say that 75% of your company loves a 3D, but you hate it, and you want to get it into it right away, there is still the sketch view. It puts you back into your 2D sketch view, and you can work from there. But by default now, you will start out in more of a 3D look. And then from there, again, you can configure it out or hit the sketch view button to go back into your 2D looks from that point. Okay? So notice again the difference in interface. Essentially, all of these buttons that you had on your right-hand side are now over here. Notice how your constraints are exposed to you. All of them are exposed. All of your tools are exposed. You still have drop downs for those. The two commands that have changed, named in Sketcher, or line, which is now called line change. That's not too hard to remember. And then also your use command. So that copy command that everyone's used to is now called project. It is only the project. The offset is the use plus the offset. And then the thicken, for those of you that are in Wildfire 5, is the offset plus 1 tool that is there. So project is use, offset is the use plus the offset, and then thicken is the same one that is currently in Wildfire 5. Now, one thing quickly about this that I have found, since we do training and I deal with a lot of new users, I find that I pick some things up from what users do and accidentally do, especially in the new interface, is that notice how I'm in the Sketch tab, right? There's a tab for Sketcher, but notice how I can, I shouldn't even say accidentally, maybe purposely, come over and switch into any one of these other tabs at any point in time, and you can do different things. So for instance, if I was in the Sketch tab and I wanted to measure something, I can just come over to the Analysis tab, start my Measure tool, pick whatever I want, doing a measurement or whatever it may be, and then when I'm done, I can go back over and get into my Sketch tab. So just because you're in the Sketch tab doesn't mean you don't have access to some of these, but one thing I realized is that some new users and new users to the software, to this version of the software, once you get over here, it's like, where am I at and where am I? Just remember that you still have two different ones, and to be honest with you, and this isn't very good, but I promise you that this Sketch and this Extrude are very slightly different blues. Not that that helps out. You kind of have to remember where you're going back to, but I promise you they're a tiny bit different color. It would be nice if this one was red or one of them was red or whatever it may be, but you never know. Maybe that'll be in a future release of the software. Okay, so here's Sketch. Now, for those of you that are using Wildfire 5, there are some differences in Creo, right, to Creo 1 or Creo 2. For instance, if I draw a line, notice how the Sketcher diagnostic tools are on by default now. So whenever you create your open sketches, you will see that they're open sketches. Whenever you create your closed loop, which we will do here in just a second, they are on by default now. You do not have to turn them on just at every single time you start your sketch. And then another one, and to be honest with you guys, most of this other stuff still behaves exactly the same. But one of them that is new here is center rectangle. So before, everybody on here being Pro E users know that for the most part, you only can create ideas of symmetry about center lines, right? You have to put in a center line to create some type of concept of symmetry, whether it's through the intent manager doing it or whether it's through your constraints. So if I created a line, I cannot create it, symmetrical about our reference here. But what they did do is put in something called a center rectangle. And what a center rectangle does is that it allows me to pick a center point, which in this case will be, let's get that in 2D so everybody see that. And now I can drag symmetrical about the point that I have. So it is actually symmetrical about essentially the point based off the construction lines, even though it behaves like it's symmetrical about this specific reference. It really is symmetrical about that center point because of the construction lines that I put in. If I delete the construction lines, then it goes back to being back to being independent from what it was before. But there is that idea. Okay, so let's go ahead and put it in. There it is. We'll change this guy to, I don't know, 30 or something like that, and we'll change this guy to 30. There we are. And now we'll say, okay, there it is. Let's change. And so now we have our first feature. Okay. So again, if I want to sketch something else here, if I pick on that front surface, again, hit the Extrude button. What's interesting about this now, once you have established geometry, and even some users in Creo 2 don't know this. This isn't something, I don't know why it's not promoted more, but everybody knows here that if I want to snap on to this edge or if I want to dimension from that edge in some form, it has to become a reference. You know, we come up, you still have your references button. But now, notice how is that if I start a command, and let's say now for whatever reason I want to snap on to this edge, what you can do is if you hold the Alt button, see how it drops the point, or essentially the line point, and if I pick now and I let go of my Alt, it now becomes a reference. So what I call this is references on the fly. It only works though if you are in a command. So if I'm out of a command, right, I can't hold the Alt button, right, nothing really happens. But if I'm in a command, hold the Alt button, it drops it, allows me to pick it, and now I have the ability to snap on. So yes, you can still do it from your references. Yes, you can still do that. And again, you can pick edges compared to surfaces, but essentially at this point in time, really what it is reference creation on the fly, okay? Reference creation on the fly using your Alt button. So just hold that Alt button, and it makes it easy for you to do that, okay? Now, I'm also going to do something fairly simple, and actually I want my references to be this guy and this guy, because I'd like to show you something here in just a second. And then let's delete, let's dimension like this. And then let's delete that reference. There we go. There we go. Okay. So we have built essentially our little extrusion or our shape bar extrusion off of the edges of this block. And now when I hit OK, so one thing I did want to show you is obviously when you're creating your extrude, that's still the same, no difference. But if you do right-click, you can now add taper, or essentially you can add draft as you are creating your extrude. So if you wanted to create some type of cone, you don't have to create a blend. You don't have to create a cylinder and then add draft. You can just create your circle, and then at that point in time, put in your draft from that point. Notice how it will collapse on itself. There are more complicated shapes that won't work, but simple shapes like this, it will collapse on itself and it's still produced. But I can now add draft while I am essentially in the extrude tool. Okay, so pretty nice stuff in the sketcher. Some simplified things as far as how they are allowing you to get in Sketcher, and some differences in some tools and those type of functions, but just made it a little bit easier to deal with Sketcher in general. So we've covered interface. We've covered some of the options. We've covered some of the options in Sketcher, and then we also covered the taper function. Okay, and so now another thing that by default is on is, for those of you that were familiar in Wildfire 5 with the dynamic editing, dynamic editing option. So you had, everybody on here should have a good idea of what edit and edit definition. And for those of you that use dynamic edit, essentially what it was real-time rendering as you were dragging objects around. So again, I'll do this quickly here. Everybody, in Wildfire 5 essentially was used to the behavior that if I picked this guy and did edit or double-clicked it, either way, that essentially you would get the dimensional values that existed. Okay, and so if I come in here and change this value or change any other of these values, essentially I would have to wait until either I hit the regenerate button or hit Control G, and then any changes that I had made would regenerate at that point in time. Okay, so that's essentially the behavior in Wildfire 5. What they introduced was the dynamic editing functionality, and now by default in Creo, in all of the Creos, the dynamic editing by right-clicking, or what they now call auto-regenerate, is the default behavior of the edit function. So what happens here, and let's edit this guy and watch this behave, is that if I come in and double-click this guy, first of all, I can drag this guy around. Oops, sorry, wrong one. But notice how this feature is moving along with it. Before, we literally would have to wait until we hit the Control G, or we'd have to wait again until we regenerate it to see that happen. But now, any child object that's related to my feature that is being edited will update real time as I'm dragging or changing values through edit. It is the default behavior now of the software. Again, if you right-click when you're in the edit mode, you see auto-regenerate. Essentially, that will turn it on or turn it off. So if you don't like this, you can turn this off if you don't like it. But I think it's kind of slick and makes it nice unless you have something really difficult to regenerate and you may be having some problems as far as hanging up in regeneration times. But you can turn it on. You can turn it off. It makes it kind of nice to be able to see what's happening as you are editing those guys right here. Okay, so auto regenerate turns that on and off, and those are now the new edit capabilities within Creo 2. Okay. Let me see here, just 1 second, guys. There is a question, and I just want to see it here real quick, and maybe I can answer it on the fly. Okay. So, quick question, and I'm just going to do this here real quick, and while we're talking, because it is a good point, and it should be brought up. That if I come in and let's do this now, I'm going to put a round quickly on this guy. There we are. And what I'll do is I'll come back into my original extrude, and I will delete this guy, and we still get the same warning. And let's put in some other shape. Now, when you do produce a failure, for those of you that are not using at least Wildfire 5 and not used to the interface, but I still can now do a save, right? So it still will save at this point in time. So it will save with failures. Some people are kind of okay with that. Most are not. But yes, you still can save with a failure. So for the gentleman that asked that question, hopefully that answers your question quickly. And it's something good to bring up. And I usually don't answer on the fly like that, but it was a good point. Okay. All right. So just a few ideas here. There we go. We'll kind of work off to the side here for these. I'll show you the new blend tool. This is a total revamp. Even those of you in Wildfire 5, this is a total revamp from 5, and it's also, I believe, I'm pretty sure it's a total revamping tool for also the Creo. Okay. So underneath the shapes, you will find blend. There we are. Now I can say I want to define an internal blend, or sorry, the internal shape, and I'll quickly create the shape here. I'll just create something about like that. You still see your start points, right? Still start points. You can switch them by picking another point and right-click and saying start point. None of that has changed. But now, notice how instead of me creating and toggling and doing the toggle function, essentially it allows me to drag out to my next position. And if you right-click again, I can say sketch. Notice how it shows me where my old, or I shouldn't say old, but my previous sketch was. And now if I want to, and just for simplicity purposes for our little demo here, there's my next shape, and when I hit OK, notice how now it shows me the result of my sketch real time as I drag that guy around, right? So there it is. Also notice how I can drag my sketch around in my blend in my second section, again, as I'm dragging that around. So this is a total revamp of that tool and how that behaves. So blend tool is quite a bit different, and for the essence of time, we're already at 12:40. Time flies when you're having fun. I would have gone through the Helical Sweet button, but they have made the Helical Sweet tool much more efficient, easier to find, especially when it comes to the variable pitch and how you define it. Makes it a lot easier to go through that. One other tool we'll deal with, and we can do this in a number of different ways, but it's kind of cool to see it in Sketcher, not necessarily in parts. But let me open up my part that I have right here. Okay, is that here is section. Here's a new cross-sectioning tool. This is a Creo 2.0. That if I hit cross-section before, everybody knew you had to have a surface or a plane or something in that spot. Notice how now when I pick that plane, yes, I can get a cross-section, but also notice how I can dynamically create a cross-section. And while I'm at it, let's go ahead and put a color on it so we can see, essentially see the different surfaces as we are cutting. Also notice how it will also give me a 2D, essentially a 2D look in this orientation as I'm dragging through. So this is the real time what my cross-section will look like. I can put on some cross-hatching if I want to. And then if I do hit the OK button, it still goes into my usual sections area. So I have no cross-section, and then I have my cross-section. There it is. So when I hit that OK button, it automatically saves it over. It automatically saves it over into my usual spot that I would expect it to be. But essentially now I just pick the cross-section button and drag it from that point in time. And again, it's just more of a dynamic way. And again, whether it's in the part or assembly, doesn't make a difference. Also notice how when I created cross sections, notice how they are essentially get put into the model tree. I believe you can take your config or your tree config and take these out of here, but by default now it does put it into the model tree at the bottom, kind of like a footer. For those of you that are familiar to the footer idea. Okay, so there is the cross section. That is a 2.0 enhancement, and again, it makes creating cross sections much easier than what it did before. Okay, we'll switch gears from kind of our part stuff. We'll hop right into some of our assembly stuff. The major thing that I'll show you here in just a second, but one thing that I did want to show you is that notice how when I open up an assembly, they have now put a search directly into the model tree. Okay, so if I wanted to find and I didn't know where bolt was, I can come in, type in BOLT, hit the enter button, and it will find all bolts. And I should hit star here, sorry guys, bolt. And if I hit star bolt, it will show me where all of my bolts, and it will highlight any bolts that I might have right here. Okay, so here are all my bolts, there they are. And so as I go through and look at those guys, it highlights bolts. This is not selection, it's just highlight more than anything else. So again, if I come in and type in CYL for cylinder, there we are, it highlights cylinder, and now I can see my cylinder and it will highlight for me. So instead of always having to go up through your search tools or your find tools, now exactly what they're called, you do have searching capabilities within directly within the interface. And then also, and I can't remember honestly if this is a 1 or a 2 enhancement. Notice how now though, if I pick a component and if I right click, I do have locate in model tree, which will locate it, and if it's in a subassembly, it will locate it in the model tree and expand for you. And then also I can say select parent. So if a component is part of a top level assembly, I can also see what that subassembly or top level assembly that it's in also. So picking a component, right-clicking and doing that also will get you to that component. And again, it's just the idea and concept of being able to find things quicker within an assembly. Now, let's go back here. We'll do this on a little bit different of an assembly, and I'm going to cover the major change that has gone on in the assembly part of it. Essentially now, and I shouldn't say essentially, but there is no more mate, align, and insert. They have been replaced with coincident and distance. Now, just for a frame of reference, and I'll explain it here quickly, everybody on here essentially should know that the difference between mate and align was a flip, right? Two surfaces pointing at each other, two surfaces pointing in the same direction. The mate and align essentially covered that, and underneath mate and align, you would find the offset command or the coincident command, or you'd find the orient command. And so what PTC did was, instead of allowing mate and align and insert, and I should say, and we'll talk about insert in a second, they now just use coincident and distance. Okay, so we go ahead and turn off. We'll leave our datums on for this. So now let's go ahead and bring this guy back in. Let's delete him. Let's bring back in our shaft. Now, if I come in, first of all, you're going to notice difference in color. This is under constrained component, or non-constrained component is in purple. You will also find your dragger. So instead of holding the Control and Alt button, can you still hold the Control button? The Control and Alt button? The answer is yes. You still can do that. But you will now have the 3D dragger that allows you to position into orientation if you want to. But now, if I pick a surface and I pick a surface, that's its guess. So insert is now coincident. Coincident also takes care of mate and align, and if you want to switch between mate and align, there's a flip of the button. So for instance, it guessed coincident for my two cylindrical surfaces, which takes the place of insert, and now I'm going to say I want this surface and that surface, and let's see what it guesses. It guessed coincident. Now, if I want to switch from the mate idea to the align idea, all I have to do is either right-click and say flip, or pick the button, and there you go. So again, insert, mate, and align have now become coincident and distance. And the only difference between coincident and distance is if I right-click and say distance, this is offset. That's it. So whether I double-click and change a value or whatever it may be, they condense 3 commands now down into 2 commands, and there's a flip of the button that switches it from mate to align. That's it. It really isn't any more different than that in any form. So if you notice here, and let's clear all of these out just so you can see, there are a few other new commands, but they're pretty straightforward. Is that if I hit my drop down, here's distance, here's angle offset. Everybody should be fairly familiar with that. There's now parallel, which makes sense, obviously. You have your coincident, normal, coplanar, centered, tangent, fix, and default. Those are now the constraints that you would use. They're pretty straightforward. Any assembly that you have in the previous versions in Wildfire 5 and back, once you bring it into any one of the Creo softwares, they will update with all of the new constraints. One question I always get is, well, is there a problem with that? I have not seen a problem with that. That doesn't mean there isn't one out there. I have not personally seen any problems with any users bringing up new assemblies in Creo and having a problem with that. So that essentially, guys, is what now the new constraints are. Any of your motion constraints, right, are still the same. I promise you, if I could hit this drop down right now, let me clear it. If I could hit this drop down right now, none of this over here has changed in any form. And actually, they put in this this gimbal connection, and I haven't even messed with it yet, and I probably need to just to see what it does. Okay. All right. So those are the major changes in. Well, you know what? Let me do one more. I'll do one more change in the assembly, and the reason is just because for those of you that are doing simplified reps, this kind of becomes important. But notice how now is that if I hit the open button, and I'm going to do this guy right here. Notice how there's now something called open subset. Before this was open rep, but it's now also called open subset. And in my opinion, this is essentially simplified reps on the fly. So if you don't have a simplified rep, and if I hit open subset, what I get is an interface that allows me to create these simplified rep essentially on the fly, right? So what I can do here is, if you notice, I can turn certain components off. Let's say I don't want the engine block front, I don't want the engine block rear, and I also want to change this one to, you know, some type of graphics or geometry rep, but I still have the preview. But now, when I do this and when I get into it, it says, do you want to save this as a simplified rep? I say yes, call it rep 1, and now when I open this guy up here, there it is. Oh, did I turn it back on? Maybe I accidentally turned it back on. Oh, yeah, we turned it back into a master rep. Sorry, guys. This is what I wanted to, there it is. That's what it was supposed to look like. And so now I would have got that simplified rep on the fly, and I can now save it. There you go. Okay, so you don't have to open up this large assembly, create your simplified rep. You can still do it out of the view manager. You still see simple rep and do it this way. But you now can create that on the fly before you ever even open up that assembly, and it makes it nice so you don't have to load all that extra information when you're not necessarily wanting to load it. Okay, so simplified reps on the fly, the new constraints, and some of the search tools within now Creo 2, the Creo 2 release of software. The last thing that we'll cover is a little bit of sheet metal. We'll just start a sheet metal part here from scratch. We'll do something simple, just create, oops, sorry guys, let's do it the way I just got done talking about it. We'll pick a datum plane and pick planar. Create something fairly simple here. There you go, something about like that. We'll say, okay, so here's our planar first wall that we have. For those of you that didn't know that this is possible, that if I do hit my flange button and pick this guy, if I hold the shift button, I can pick the rest of my edges at once and create essentially that box at once. It essentially is the loop command. You can do that out of the flange. What's nice about that, it does take into account all of your edges and miters that you might have to deal with all in the corners, so you can deal with that a little bit easier. So essentially by just picking an edge, holding the shift button, and picking the other edges either with the shift individually or by the loop selection, you can do this. You could actually, I believe, do that in Wildfire 5, so for those of you that have been using this, this shouldn't be that big of a deal. Now, when I create my flat, if I pick an edge to create my flat, let's pick the other edge so it goes the other way. There we are. And controlling the flat through, again, all of your nodes, dragging your nodes back and forth. That stuff's pretty straightforward. Let's put a little bit bigger of a bend radius over there in the corner. One thing I do like here is under the offset. If I pick that and I say by value, one thing I do like is notice how if I do this by value, I can drag this up and it will create the appropriate geometry. If I drag it down, it will also create the appropriate geometry. So that's kind of nice to see that work also. You'll find that under the offset command. Let me kind of drag this guy out here. Other things that are that are new about this is that notice how now there is essentially a flat pattern preview. So as I'm creating my sheet metal part, if I'm concerned about size or whatever it may be let's drag this out so we can see size here. I can actually see dimensional sizes of my flat pattern preview. You also can create a family table instance if that's how you create your flat patterns to begin with. You can create your instances out of this guy right here. So you can see that preview, and again, as I adjust and add things, that changes. Okay. Another new thing I really like about Creo is that under the Bend tab, for those of you that are familiar with the Bend tab, you know it wasn't the easiest thing to use. There was a lot of buttons to pick and click. So now, essentially what I do is I can establish a bend line by just dragging. I can now dimensionally control that bend line, and then even though we bent about the, it's kind of funny, we bent the entire part about that. Essentially now the bend is now controlled just through that point. Okay, so here's my bend. There it is, and we bent it kind of the wrong way, but that's okay. No big deal. All right, there it is. All right, so there's my bend that I have, but essentially you just establish on what surface, from where to where do you want to create your bend. You drag, you can control it, and then again you get your bend and your definitions. Before you had to create sketches and do those type of things, and it was obviously quite a bit different, much more difficult to create that stuff. Okay? Last thing that I'll show here, let's kill that bend. It might cause me to go haywire. Let's go ahead and close this guy. Is that for those of you that use the form ideas within the software, now, and we didn't cover this, but now in Wildfire 5 they introduced the concept of the on-surface coordinate system. And if your original form is based off of that on-surface coordinate system, you no longer have to essentially assemble that form that you have. And so what I can do here is come in and essentially just drag as far as placement, but I also can come in, drag rotation of my form that I have, and then also, and this is still the same, but I can come in and remove surfaces for my removal surfaces, and so it's much easier to define and control those forms that you put in instead of assembling them. Essentially you drop it, attach it to your references that you want for location, and then again if you want to, you can add rotation into it. Okay? So again, just a few previews, some differences. There's quite a few differences. There's some other stuff that might be a little bit more interesting for you guys to check out. But where are we at time-wise? We're getting kind of close. Okay, I'll save just a few minutes. One thing I do want to make you guys aware of, if you are interested in all of the what's new, if you do come into your reference documents on ptc.com, for those of you that are not necessarily familiar with this guy right here, let me see. There we are. Creo Parametric 2.0. Let's say all is that if you go find your reference documents, and if you drag all the way down to the bottom, you will find your what's new in Creo 2 Parametric Direct and Simulate. Essentially it's the PDF, but if you're ever wondering where that what's new document is, if you find your reference documents, and you can find that right under the support page, if you go to all of your documents, and again this is about a 134-page PDF that shows you what most of this stuff is and where you can find it and all the things that they have changed, or at least publicly and published for the change right here. Okay, so it's an easy way to find your what new guides and those type of things. So, all right. So for time-wise, it looks like we're right up against it. At this point in time, if there are any questions that you have, please feel free to please feel free to ask them down in the questions portion of it. For those of you that are wanting to get off right now, that's the only thing that we will do. I did tell you that I will put my information up here. So if there are any other questions that you might have, please feel free to contact me. The young lady that you heard on the call earlier, her name was Rosalinda. She can also answer questions, but feel free to email me or give me a call, and I will answer whenever I can and whatever I can do for you guys. But again, if you're done and you're ready to get off, we're pretty much done with the webcast at this point in time. If you do have some questions, again, feel free to put them into the question queue, and as they come on, I will answer them. If not, I will turn the webcast off in about 5 minutes.
I do have some. Well, looks like there's some questions coming in now. I'll say what I need to say in just a few minutes.
Okay. So Mike Klein, what about layers? Shoot me, because that's kind of a general question. Shoot me an email with your specific questions about layers that you have, and I'll answer that if you don't mind, and I'll answer that one. That's kind of a really generic, broad question. Something specific would help me out, and I'll gladly answer that for you if you don't mind. If you don't mind, Mike. Yes, Rosalinda, can you tell the guys, Ken?
All the questions will be recorded, and I can forward all those questions to you, Ben, for you to answer.
Okay, and then also, we put these up, guys. We put these up on YouTube. We always have these up on YouTube, so you can find them in essentially under the CDT YouTube section. Rosalinda, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, also, what will happen is once we translate the video, right, I will send all attendees and registrants an email with a link, direct link to this particular webinar. And feel free to go ahead and join our page. That way, when anything new comes up and maybe you didn't get to attend or even register, you'll automatically get a notification stating that there's a new webinar available. And also, I am the contact at CDT for all training needs. So if you have any training needs or questions, feel free to email me or give me a call. I'll be happy to help you out.
All right. So Tom Welt, is the dynamic section you showed like the old dynamic clip used back in 2000 or in Pro 2000? So I have to put on my thinking cap. I haven't used 2000 and I don't know how long. If you're talking about the clip function, where it was just that dynamic clip where you can kind of push it back and forth and you can see stuff behind it, not really. I mean, it's more based on the idea of creating cross sections, but I guess when you think about it, it could be dynamically used in some form like that. I don't remember if that dynamic clip is, I guess I haven't even tried to use it in the Creo 2 version of the software. So yes and no, that you could use it in that form, but it is based more about more on just applying cross section. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, Ken, can whole features be modified in different family table instances? I'm going to say the answer to that is yes, but I would have to get a little bit more detail as far as what do you mean as far as modified, and where you're trying to modify it. Is it coming out of the generic? Is it coming out of the instance? And how that you want to do that? I would have to see that. Shoot me an email, Ken, on that, and I will try to answer that as a little bit more specific. If you have a little bit more of a specific question, it'll help me out answer that a little bit better. So feel free to send me an email, Ken, and I'll try to answer that a little bit more specifically when we get a chance, if you don't mind. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it, Nathan, for the compliment. Guys, we're going to shut it down here in about a minute. Please don't let that deter you from continuing to ask questions. Please just send me an email, and I will get back with those as soon as possible. I'll do as much as I can to make sure I get your guys' questions answered. Okay? Let's see. I think I can fit this one. Can you move the status bar message down? Wildfire is stuck up top. The answer, Alan, the answer is no. Pretty much where something is at now in the interface is where it's at. So the answer is no. The status bar is not movable. Sorry, bud. Okay, Rosalinda, I think we're gonna shut it down. We're gonna shut it down at this point in time. Again, feel free to ask questions and shoot me some emails with some questions. Thank everybody so much for hopping on today. It was great to have you on, and hopefully you'll hop on for some of the other ones and get some good use out of it. Thanks a bunch. See you soon.
Thank you.